All right, welcome back to another episode of the All Automotive Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Clausen, and today we're coming to you again from the G-Force Automotive Studios. Proudly serving the Jackson area since 2007, G-Force Automotive is your local Auto Value Certified Service Center. Their experience enables them to maintain your vehicle all year round. Visit gforceautomotive.net for your next service appointment. G-Force Automotive, where they make friends, one car repair at a time. All right, well, welcome back to the show. This month, we are talking about electric vehicles. And a couple weeks back, I had somebody reach out to me. His name is Zack Hurst. He has a fellow podcaster, has his own podcast called the EV Resource. And he's with us today. And we're going to be talking a lot about what's going on with electric vehicles and what we can see. And who better to talk about all that than Zack Hurst. Zack, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get interested in electric vehicles?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the short story. I have been a car guy my whole life. Every car I've had, I've always wanted to modify and change and go faster and look better. I actually went to school through a Toyota program. So I was an ASE Master Tech with Toyota. And
the T10 program?
I've always... The T10 program.
Awesome.
Yes. Yep. And I realized very quickly that while I enjoyed working on my own cars, I didn't like working on other people's cars. So I got out of the industry in that way. But, I mean, it's something that stays in your blood. Once you're a car guy, I think you're always a car guy. And that has stuck with me. And then 3.5 years ago, I started researching an electric vehicle to replace my wife's Volkswagen because she does food delivery and certainly saving on gas because it was a tuned GTI, a Mark 6. And so, premium gas, and it wasn't exactly tuned for fuel efficiency. So it was costing a lot of money just to operate that as a delivery vehicle.
Oh, sure.
And honestly, it's not ideal as a delivery vehicle anyway. So we bought an EV, a little Chevy Spark EV. It was really, really affordable. Just paid a little bit more than $11,000 for it. And she didn't like it. It just didn't have the range that she was looking for. It was uncomfortable. I mean, after all, it is a Chevy Spark, so it's not exactly a premium.
Right, that's the littlest car
vehicle
they make, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And cheap in both cost as well as build quality.
Yeah, it's in every word of the entry-level vehicle.
Indeed. But it has 327 foot-pounds of torque, and it's only 2,800 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So she didn't like it, but I said, I'll take it. So that became my car. And while I had done research and I looked into electric vehicles and I kind of knew a little bit, it wasn't until after owning that car and driving it for a while that I realized I had so many more questions and I didn't have the answers and I didn't know where to go to get the answers. So that started this whole journey. I mean, I created EV Resource originally just to help answer questions about electric vehicles and be kind of a one-stop shop that people could go to.
Right.
And really answer questions that they might not even know that they had yet.
Right. And
well, go ahead.
And from my experience listening to your podcast, I've listened to probably 2 months worth of it. And man, I know more now than I think I did obviously before. So you got a lot of good information. That's for sure.
Yeah. And that first step really opened the floodgates. And I love going fast and having fun, and the experience of driving an electric vehicle, it in many ways, it's like a roller coaster that you own, that you can just go hop on whenever you want. I mean, the immediate response to your right foot is something that is exceptionally addictive. And certainly many EVs have such an enormous amount of torque that it's a lot of fun. It really is. And when I'm driving an EV, whether it's mine or somebody else's, I do not miss the sound of the engine
Really?
when I'm driving.
Yeah. Well,
So that's something that I didn't expect, and it kind of took me off guard in the beginning, where if I'm watching EVs like drag race or whatever, it's incredibly boring because there isn't that drama of the sound.
right.
But when you're behind the wheel, I don't miss it at all. And that's something that is really interesting. So I prefer EVs from the technology standpoint and the power and the performance. That's what gets me really excited, but also helping other people kind of navigate the transition to electric vehicle ownership is something that it means a lot to me as well, because I like to help people. I like to make a difference. And when somebody says to me that they got an EV because of either listening to the podcast or reading the magazine, or even just if I've helped them in person, that validates a sense of purpose within me.
Right. And that goes a long way too. So that being said, that's where I was thinking. It's like I've had the chance to drive a couple of those, and I drove the Ford C-Max, and that's a dual purpose one. It's got its own little engine, but you can put it, there's that they have a plug-in hybrid version of that. And we had the opportunity to work on that one, and I drove it down the road, and it's kind of strange not listening to the engine when you're going, when you're going down the road, and then it starts and runs when it needs to, like, the Toyota Prius and the other ones like that. But yeah, that's just really, to me, it was just like, that's such a strange, but you're right. It goes there. I'm a fan of speed, and if you dig hard enough, you can find a video of me doing the Richard Petty driving experience at Michigan International Speedway. So it's like going 150 miles an hour around a NASCAR track. I'm all for it,
Yeah.
and I grew up in the east side of Cleveland, and we would go to mid Ohio, road course racing. That's fun too. So yeah, the opportunity there would be awesome for me to get on a course with an EV. That'd be fun, I think.
Yeah, my local racetrack, which I call my playground, is Dominion Raceway. It's a smaller 2-mile road course here in Central Virginia, and I test all sorts of EVs up there. So actually, just before Thanksgiving, I had the chance to test 3 different electric vehicles and all run them around the track. And the one that would definitely be my favorite was made by Genesis. It's the GV60 Performance, but it's 483 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque, all-wheel drive, 0 to 60 in 3.7. And as I was testing it, it ran the quarter at a 12-second flat.
Whoa.
At 111 miles an hour, or 108, something like that. I got to double check the numbers.
That's no nitrous either.
But no. Well, but here's the cool thing about it. It has a button. It's called the boost button, and it gives you an extra 50 horsepower for 10 seconds.
Oh, that's
so
really cool.
It's like nitrous.
Oh, man.
So, of course, I'm pressing the button as like almost constantly. I'm like, give me all the power.
See if you can make it push in the turns.
Oh, my goodness. Well, that thing, the way it handled, I mean, like it or not, cars these days are becoming much more software driven than they are hardware.
Oh my
driven.
gosh, yes.
It's not about tuning a carburetor or even a fuel injection system anymore. Especially with electric vehicles, the way Genesis tuned the power delivery going into a corner, and it is a heavier vehicle, so going into a corner, it would understeer and really push. But as soon as you get onto the throttle, the back end wanted to step out on you, and you wouldn't exactly drift it, or at least I wasn't trying to.
Yeah, get some forward drive.
I was trying to set a fast time on the track, but it was amazing how fluid and how much control you could have over it just with your right foot. I mean, it was a spectacular experience.
Yeah, and so the one of the things that was confusing to me at first, and I guess you can call me kind of a traditionalist when it comes to EVs and stuff like that. So I'm just like thinking to myself the other day, I'm like, well, how would you soup one of those up? I mean, We can get different cylinder heads. We can make different, have different carburetors and do the programming on the PCM a little bit differently for fuel delivery. And it's like, so how do you soup one of those up?
Yeah. This is something that I have struggled with myself because, like I said, I like to modify all my cars to go faster. Right. And it's software related. So I would have to learn how to program, and different manufacturers make it easier than others. Certainly GM is notorious for not making it very easy to get into their software. Right, it's encrypted. And so aside from, like, if you want to work with your OEM equipment, it's going to be really tough to modify without having like a different module that you can plug in to reprogram things. I know with Teslas, there's a company called iGenext. Oh. And they have really figured out how to crack Tesla's software. So the Model S Plaid, they had one, they removed the speed limiter. So right now, Tesla limits that vehicle at 175 miles an hour top speed. Oh boy. They removed that. They took it to airstrip, and they were able to go 216 miles an hour.
Holy moly.
Same hardware. They just removed the top speed limiting on that. So it's not to say it's impossible, but it's certainly challenging. And I don't think, somebody like me in my backyard, I'm going to do anything. Right. You'd have to really know your stuff.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's coming. It's like the technology always seems to find a way. And even with vehicle restoration, because currently I'm doing a LS engine swap into an old 68 Chevy pickup truck. And, so the technology part of it is like, man, I want the thing to start and run so that my wife can drive it. So, and that's the goal with that truck. It's not to be, pumping the gas and pulling the choke and doing that kind of thing. So, I think the technology as it comes around and as these vehicles are out there, and for them to use them as, I guess the bad word or the way to say it would be is take that guinea pig and work with it. And then here's this thing that we can plug into the data link computer or the DLC. And then guess what? Now you're right. It's got 100 more horsepower and boy, it's got lots more torque too. And you can go 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds now, which is crazy. That's really crazy how fast that thing is. If you're saying it's 3 seconds,
I mean,
ish.
We ended up replacing my wife's GTI because the rear main went out and I didn't feel like ripping apart the
right
ripping the transmission off to fix it. Even though I could have, I'm like, nah, I don't want to. So we did get her the base model, the rear wheel drive Model 3 Tesla. And that company, Nginx, they offer a performance boost, 50 horsepower, half a second off the 0 to 60. So instead of 5.3, it would be down to 4.8. But then they also unlock the heated steering wheel, heated seats, premium audio, all of that in one package for $1,000.
Oh, that's a no-brainer.
That's really cool. Well, here's the hiccup, if you will. Obviously, when you're messing around with a company's software, if they find out, say goodbye to your warranty. Right. So I haven't done that yet because I'm like, I don't want to get caught by Tesla. And it's like, I struggle with that because I'm like, hey, this is my car. I bought this car.
Right.
Like I should be able to do what I want.
Well, the same way.
So I think
the same way we've got secure gateways now, so people can't get into your car and mess with the programming. That there's a secure gateway that says, nope, sorry, you're outside person. You can't get in. So think about that. I mean, the people that have these cell phones, Wi-Fi networks that are included in your vehicle. And a lot of times, you can just get on your phone in a parking lot and turn your Wi-Fi on and see what it says about whose car's around you. And think about how that, can be manipulated to, so that they've come out with these things in the last couple of years. They're called secure gateways, which is making it harder for us to get in there and do our diagnosing. And, you know, like, again, people think it's simple, and sometimes it's not. So you're talking about your Spark, and it was not the greatest range. What kind of range does it get?
So the Spark EV was Chevy's first real go at a mass-produced electric vehicle, and I'm skipping over the EV1 that GM made back in the 90s because that was early, and it was lease only, and they crushed most of them anyway when the leasing was done. So the Spark EV in 2014 was really their first re-entry into the EV space. Right. And it was entirely designed to be a compliance car. I mean, this was available on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and then eventually, I believe, Maryland as well. And it's kind of part of the first generation of electric vehicles that I lump in with like the Fiat 500e and the older Nissan Leaf.
Yes.
Their ranges are well under 100 miles. So EPA range on the Spark is 82 miles.
Oh, wow.
Around town with the stock wheels and tires, I could easily hit that and then some. On the highway, however, because it's not aerodynamic, realistically, I'd be looking at around 65 miles of range at 60 to 65 miles an hour.
Yeah, so for me, that would be like 3 or 4 trips back and forth to work.
Right. You know, so I mean, it's designed to be a short distance urban commuter vehicle. And for that purpose, it does amazing. I have taken it on longer road trips. I took it from Richmond here to the Eastern Shore of Maryland and back, which was 550 miles, and just charged along the way. And one of the benefits of having a really small battery is that it doesn't take long to charge either. So I would plug it in. I would typically go and either grab some to-go food or use the restroom. And by the time I got back to the car, it was waiting for me. It was already done, 15, 20 minutes. And that's all it would take for a full recharge on the car at a fast charge.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Well, that's not every EV, because most EVs have batteries that are much bigger and also can charge much more quickly as well. So it's interesting that GM built this car in 2014. Mine's a 2016. But it really, I think it was ahead of its time in many ways, but obviously for most people in their mindset, they are wanting a lot more range than that.
Yeah, I know. And my experience with GM, and because I was a service manager at a GM dealer for quite a number of years back in the late 90s, early 2000s. They always used a vehicle like, let's say they used the Spark, and I'm guessing, and this would kind of be what I would think is, it's like, okay, we got to get to an EV part. Let's put this car out and let's see what happens. And that's their version of their beta testing their batteries, their design, their, all that stuff, so that they can go, okay, so now we have the Bolt and it does this. We've made leaps and bounds because of this car. And I think that's where they a lot of times are ahead of the game sometimes when it comes to stuff like that. So let's talk about the charging part of it. And a lot of the listeners of my podcast are, this is an informative podcast. So we want people to understand that what EVs do and how they charge and how long it takes them to charge. So talk about that a little bit, and how each manufacturer might be different, or does the Tesla Model S charge faster than the other ones, or what's going on there?
So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible.
Oh, please do.
Because charging is exceptionally complicated for people that want to dive into all the technical stuff. I mean, it can really get nitty gritty. Generally, what affects charging speed for any EV are going to be a few main factors. First and foremost being the state of charge on the battery.
Right.
If your battery is, let's say, 80% and you want to fill it all the way to 100%, it's going to charge very slowly, even at a fast charger, in order to fill it up. It's kind of like if you're pouring water into a glass, you slow down towards the top if you want to fill it right to the very brim.
Right.
Where at a lower state of charge, like 10%, most EVs are going to see a much, much higher charge rate and even see their advertised peak charge rate at that lower state of charge, between 10 and 30 or sometimes up to 50%. So that's one variable. Ambient temperature. So if it's cold outside in the wintertime, it's going to charge more slowly.
Right.
If it's super hot, like over 100 degrees hot, it will charge more slowly because there are fans and coolant lines and things going to keep the battery at an ideal temperature. And that's the other thing. Battery temperature will affect how quickly you can charge for the same reasons. Electrons like to move at a certain temperature, and if it's too cold or too hot, it's going to affect things.
Yeah, just like any lead acid battery would in your, the 12-volt battery in your car.
Yeah, regardless of battery chemistry, there are certain properties that are going to be similar across the board. So those are kind of some main things. Battery voltage, the higher the voltage, usually the faster it can charge. Like the 800-volt systems that you'll see in the Hyundai Motor Group vehicles like the Ioniq 5 or the Kia EV6 or the Porsche Taycan or Audi e-tron GT. Those use 800-volt systems. GM's Ultium platform that's coming up, that's going to be like the Hummer EV that's out now.
Oh, yeah.
As well as the Sierra pickup. Those are going to use 800-volt systems. They can charge a lot quicker. In fact, right now, to the best of my knowledge, the Hummer EV, the GMC Hummer, is the quickest charge rate of any EV. It's over 300 something kilowatts. I mean, it's insanely quick, but it's also a very, very big battery. So when most people are talking about charging, they're not talking about charge rate, how quickly it's refilling the battery. They're talking about, well, how long do I have to stand there or sit in my car playing on my phone waiting for the car to be done?
Right.
So it's more of, the question really should be, how inconvenienced am I going to be because I have to wait?
Right. And I think that's a big question. And for me, it would be something where, I live 25 miles, 20-ish miles from my work. And if I got one of those, I guess I would put a charging station in and, it would charge while I'm at work, and then I would be able to go home. And I probably wouldn't charge it just because in my mind, charging it every day would create some sort of memory that would lower the battery life. Maybe. I don't know. Is that true?
So no, actually.
Okay.
Newer battery technology, a lot of the lithium ion batteries, they don't have a memory the way like older cell phone. I mean, even newer cell phone batteries don't. Older battery tech definitely did, and that is a very, very common misconception, because people, unless you're in this universe, if you will, the EV world, you probably aren't staying up to date on the latest technological advancements. So you're going to think things like that, and that's very, very common. Usually, most people do plug in every night at home. For those people that are like living in single family homes, or they have the ability to plug in overnight. Most EV owners now do that. When I first got the Spark, actually, I had a heavy duty 20 amp extension cord running around the back of the house and plugged into an outlet, a regular 110 outlet, and it would recharge everything I needed overnight. And I had a full battery in the morning. Most EV owners have a similar experience. They wake up, they've got everything they need, they go to and from work, they do their grocery runs, whatever,
right?
And they never have to worry about charging. The obvious exception that I would point out to your normal everyday use is if you do go on longer trips.
Yeah.
And that's where it depends very much on the person who is in the car. And the reason I say that, My wife and I, we took our Model 3, and it's only rated at like 260 miles of range. We usually don't charge more than 80 or 90%. So we've got maybe 200 to 210 miles of usable range that we rely on. We never even go that far. Between my wife and I, if we're on a road trip, we're stopping every hour and a half, usually because we need to stop.
Right.
So April, we went down to Miami. We went on a cruise for my wife's birthday, and then driving down and back, we didn't once wait for the car to charge. When we needed to stop, we plugged in, the car charged quick enough so it recouped the miles that we needed by the time we were done, 10, 15 minutes. We hopped back in, unplug, and go. Well, we did that every time we needed to stop. The car did its thing. We did our thing. We come back together and keep going. So we never once waited for the car to charge.
Interesting.
Where somebody who can maybe hold their bladder for 4 hours straight, they're going to be sitting for a half hour to 45 minutes to maybe an hour to recharge their car in order to go that next 4 hours.
Right.
So it depends a lot on the person and how you use the car, in addition to the capability of the vehicles themselves.
Now, does her car charge itself while you're going down the road, or it just discharges? There's nothing that's recouping the battery at all while you're going down the road?
The only time EVs are going to recoup energy is if you're not pushing on the accelerator. So if you're decelerating, whether that's using the actual brakes or not, electric motors have what's called regenerative braking, and it will recoup a portion of the energy that is that kinetic energy, the energy of motion, and it will convert that through the electric motor into electrical energy that then gets stored in the battery. So a great example of when this is most extreme is if somebody's going over mountains. They'll use a lot of energy climbing the mountain, but then they're recouping 30 or 40% of that energy on the way down the other side.
Yeah. So if you live out in Colorado or whatever, that's something that weighs into your decision on getting one of these cars. So where do you see the future of, let's just say the U.S. automakers, and you can throw in some of the BMWs and the foreign cars as well. Where do you see them going? I know you're talking about GM's coming out with a new platform that's going to be in the Silverado. So talk about where you think it's headed.
Well, most auto manufacturers at this point, whether they're based here in the U.S. or foreign automakers, they have come out with announcements that at a certain point, whether that be 2035, 2040, 2045, they will no longer be manufacturing new internal combustion engine vehicles.
Right.
So the future is very, I guess, set in many ways, because they are already kind of pushing towards that that model. They're going to be making all electric vehicles.
Right.
For here in the U.S., I think adoption is going to be slower than, for example, China or Europe. And the reason being is that the distances between cities, our mindset, and a lot of the culture of what we have here, and I'll say North America, because I know a lot of Canadians feel the same way. We're just not as open to the idea. And what is interesting is I've run into so many people, of course, that are anti-EV.
Right.
And I'm going, like, okay, why do you care what is powering your car? Like, the experience of driving your car, or having it do what you want or need, that's more important. Like, I don't care if you could power it by kittens. Like, it doesn't matter what it's powered by. Now, that being said, if you absolutely insist on having a car that can drive for 500 miles, refill in less than 10 minutes, and then you can drive for another 500 miles, well, then you need to stick with a gas car, because there isn't an EV right now that can do that. We're getting closer, but with all new technology, the vehicles that are capable of something close to that are the ones that cost the most, like the Lucid Air, which is $150,000 or more.
Right.
We're not going to see that technology. And honestly, I don't see technology with like 400 or 500-mile EVs happening ever for your normal passenger cars or the vehicles that we use for the majority of our needs. Most people in the US drive 40 miles or less per day. Well, every EV that is out there on the market right now can handle that. So
right.
What I see happening, we'll say 10 to 15 years from now, is a lot of people will get EVs for the stuff they need to do. Commuting to and from work, sitting in rush hour traffic, getting groceries, running the kids back and forth to soccer practice or whatever else. That's where we'll see EVs being used the most. But then what that allows is the car you like, whether it be your Camaro or your BMW M3, the car that is what you consider to be most fun. You look back at it after you park. It's your love. It's a member of your family. It's not just a device that gets you from A to B. Those cars are going to be saved for the purposes of wants. That's your weekend warrior. You can take it out to the track or whatever else. You're not putting all these miles on it commuting. You're using it for what you want to use it for instead of what you have to use it for. And I think many people don't realize that you could probably go out and buy a cheap electric car used, and the cost of gas and maintenance that you don't have to worry about will pay for that car. Keep your gas-powered car. Keep it for the fun. Get an EV essentially for free because you don't have to worry about gas or maintenance and most of the time repairs. And then now you have more options to choose from, which of course, at least me, I love having choices.
Right. And I think, for me, an EV would be, I'd have to get something that would at least go, a couple of days without having to plug it in, possibly. And make no mistake, I'm a repair shop owner. So it's one of those things where, I would certainly put in the plug at work to charge the thing up so that I'm, if I got to go on a parts run, we want to make sure we can do that. Or, like the other day, we're 40 some minutes from Ann Arbor and we had a catastrophe with a part. It was pulled wrong and delivered to us and it was wrong. So we had to go. I had to go all the way to Ann Arbor to get this part. And, fortunately, the place I had to go was not too far from where there was a Tesla supported charging station. And there was, there was 6 of them there and there was one spot open.
Yeah.
So, these people, and it was kind of confusing to me because I'm thinking, well, man, do you just forget to plug it in at night? Or I guess I was confused about why they were there. Maybe, and every single one of them were sitting in their car. I think there was one gentleman that did walk over because it was in front of a shopping center, and there's several places to eat, and there was a grocery store. So there's lots of things to do. So you park your car over there. It's quite a long walk to the grocery store from where this charging station was. But, I think that it's an opportunity there for you to go, well, there's a charging station there. So I'm really not in that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal if I get to Ann Arbor and I have a Tesla and I'm on this parts run. I had to get lunch anyway. So I probably would have drove it over there and plugged it in. Mm-hmm. So I guess now my question would be to you is, I did listen to one of your episodes. I think it was the November 21st. We were talking about there's companies out there that are remanufacturing these batteries or taking these batteries that are from the vehicles that are no longer in use or in service. Let's say, there's an end use for these batteries because, you see that all the time. It's like, well, it's just going to put them in the landfill. No, they're not. So expand on that a little bit for us so we can think to ourselves, after I get rid of this car, what's going to happen to it? It's not just going to go to the salvage yard. Somebody's going to take that and repurpose it.
Yeah. So the most expensive part of an electric vehicle is the battery. And the reason for that is there are a lot of rare minerals that are quite valuable. So the last thing anybody wants to do is throw that away. That's literally throwing money away.
Right.
Right now, and I think the episode you were listening to, I was talking about redwood materials.
Yes. Yep. And November 21st. It was, you were talking about the common charge ports, which would be cool. If you make an EV vehicle, all the charging plugs should be the same to me.
Yeah, I at this point, well, I won't get into that. I'll answer your first question.
Yeah, and we can talk about that in a minute.
But with batteries, most of the batteries are going to be recycled. They're not something that gets thrown away. But even if you own an EV, let's say the battery is no longer good enough to drive the way you want. Batteries degrade. So the mileage that you got on day one, a year later, it'll probably be degraded by maybe as much as 10% less.
Right.
Well, typically EV batteries will kind of level out at that point, but eventually nothing lasts forever. 10, maybe 15 years down the road, you might have 70% of the range or 60% of the range that you did when you started. Well, that battery is still really good for energy storage, just not for moving a vehicle. So there are companies that are using old EV batteries to help with grid resiliency, to store electrical energy that way. And then on a smaller level, you could, in theory, and I know a few people have done this kind of DIY, but they've taken car EV batteries, the high voltage batteries, and repurposed them to be a battery backup for their house. So if the power on the grid goes out, now they can run, everything that they want at their house for maybe a day or two. So they can still be used for that. But ultimately, the end life for any battery is going to be recycling, whether that's in your car or your phone or your camcorder, laptop, whatever. These things are going to get recycled. And what is interesting, and I found this really fascinating, and I'll be honest, I have no idea how the physics or the technology works, but EV batteries that are made from recycled materials as opposed to virgin materials that are fresh out of the ground, they actually perform better. So we're gonna see technology just drastically improve over the next 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, the technology we're using now for these cars is going to be radically different.
Yeah, and that's something that...
So I'm excited about that because it's progress. There hasn't been demand for lithium, as an example, until recently because of the car side of the battery revolution, if you will. So we got to give things a chance to catch up in many of these ways. It is still very new. I mean, the entire EV industry, for the most part, is only 10 to 15 years old for the most part. Right. I mean, yes, there are examples of electric cars back in the late 1800s. But I mean, the modern EV that we know today is still somewhat new, and there are a lot of unknowns and things that need to be worked out.
Right.
To go back to charging real quick, most people who have EVs now, I think I mentioned, plug them in at night at home. Well, 40% of people in this country don't live in a place where they have on-street parking. They might be in an apartment or a condo or something that they can't plug in at home currently.
Good point.
There are companies that are solving those problems and giving people a chance, because cars are parked 90% of their life. All we need to do is plug it into a 110 outlet while it's parked, wherever that might be, and then we'll be good. We don't need fast chargers everywhere to recharge in 30 minutes once a week, similar to the way we refuel gas-powered vehicles. You wait till it gets low and you refill it. We don't need to do that with EVs because electricity is already everywhere. We just need to be able to tap into the existing infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's something else that, people were asking me too, is like, okay, so, we do away with the internal combustion engine, and again, as a shop owner, I see the people that have to buy a used car because that's their means of getting transportation. So when we're talking about buying a used EV, what are some of your recommendations as far as, you know, what should they look for? Because if it's an affordable EV, and to me, and then looking down the road, is it going to be something that's going to be out of your budget if it does need this high voltage battery? Or is it something that is going to be affordable because 5, 6 years from now, it's going to be cheaper? The technology is going to advance and we're going to have, it's going to be less expensive.
Yeah, that is not an easy question to tackle, unfortunately, because the marketplace just isn't quite where it needs to be for used EVs that the warranty's expired. And the reason I say that is because EV batteries, the price of a high voltage battery changes so much based on how big it is. A 100 kilowatt hour battery is going to cost a lot more than a 25 kilowatt hour battery. But it also depends on how many of those vehicles were made. My Chevy Spark, I recently had the battery replaced because, admittedly, I was very hard on that car. And I did not take it into account.
It's still in beta testing for EV Resource. So, it's a...
I mean, yeah, it's all good.
Work in progress.
I've done what I wanted with the car, regardless of the effect. I'll put it that way. So the battery, luckily, it was under warranty. But I had the parts department check out the cost just because I was curious. Well, there was only 73 or 7,500 or so Spark EVs ever made in those 3 years.
Oh, yeah. So the price goes up then.
So very low volume. GM actually ran out of the stockpile of EV batteries they had for that car this past April. My car's battery died a couple weeks later. Originally, they told me I couldn't get a battery. They were going to buy the car back, and that was it. Well, thankfully, after I wrote an article and it got picked up by a lot of mainstream EV publications, GM kind of reversed course, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to support the car."
Yeah,
took them 4 months, and my suspicion is that they had to actually have the battery cells made on demand. Now, they have not told me that, but the whole process, I got very familiar with GM's inside workings. I talked with people at the company and at dealerships, and I kind of feel like I have a good idea of what actually was happening, even though their PR department is playing it safe.
They probably got some engineers involved and said, let's get this kid a battery.
Right. Even though it's a small battery, they wanted $30,000 for a brand new one.
Holy moly.
Or $18,000 for refurbished with a $5,000 core. So $13,000 at the end of the day if I wanted a refurbished battery, if it had not been under warranty. Well, I paid $11,500 for the car. I'm not spending any money to replace the battery.
Right.
If I'm going to keep the car now past its warranty period, because all battery warranties in the country are minimum 8 years, 100,000 miles for the battery and most of the major EV related components.
So did they tell you that you were all done once we'll put this battery in for you, Zach, but have a nice day?
No, they didn't say that. Of course, if the battery dies again while it's still under warranty, then I would expect them to honor that. But once it's out of warranty, they can wipe their hands and walk away.
Yeah, and they do that daily.
So I do not expect to replace the battery in this car the next time it dies, whenever that might be, and I don't know. And maybe I'll have gotten rid of the car by then.
Okay, so
for used EVs, to get back to that, what I always recommend for people is, number one, assuming that they found a vehicle that fits their needs with range, they like it, it's in the price range that they want, then the next thing is that I would recommend they get a battery health report. And there is a company called Recurrent, and I love them dearly because they can remotely log into, like with Teslas, you can have them log into your car, essentially read off the mileage, the how old the battery is, and like how old the car is.
So it's kind of like OnStar.
And compare to the wealth of data that they have from all of the other vehicles that they provide reports for. So like our Tesla, I get a monthly report on the health of the battery and how it relates to the rest of the Tesla fleet that Recurrent checks on. Well, you can do this with other makes and models too. So I would always tell people, and it's free. So get a free battery health report from Recurrent. I know there's other companies popping up that are starting to offer similar things. So, I mean, there certainly is going to be a market for giving that option. But then also you want to look at the same things you would look at any other car.
Oh, right.
Check out the suspension and the brakes. EVs and brakes are actually something unique because most of the time, because of the regenerative braking, you're not using the pads against the rotors. Rarely do you actually use the friction brakes unless you're under really heavy braking.
Oh, yeah.
So what has happened with a number of cars that I've heard about is the brake pads themselves actually have broken down like from a molecular level because of not being used. So then by the time you do need it, well, now they fail because they've been sitting there unused for years, or rotors that are getting rusted, or calipers that are sticking because they're rusted because they're just not being used. Well, you want to check for things like that. You want to make sure that the brakes work. But aside from that, EVs are fairly simple because they don't have all of the components that, an internal combustion engine would have. You don't have spark plugs or air filters or timing belts or water pumps or even transmissions that are, serviceable, no clutches or anything like that. So, I mean, they're exceptionally simple, but you want to make sure that the battery's in good shape. And that is the number one reason why I always tell people to get a battery health report before they buy a car. Because you want to make sure it's in good shape. And honestly, if you're finding a used EV, chances are wherever you're buying it from, if it's a used car dealership, they don't know about electric vehicles.
Right.
They don't know what to check for or what to talk about. So you have to go into that situation equipped with more knowledge than the person who's selling you the car. And that's tough for normal people. Most people don't want to put in the time or effort to learn about a new technology before buying a car.
Yeah, and that's something that I talked about on one of my episodes, is what to look for when purchasing a used vehicle. And you want to put all those things into consideration when you're doing it. It's just, it's an electric vehicle. Is it going to cost me anything to put this plug thing in my house or in my garage? It's something a simple electrician, can do for you. Most of those charging stations run off of 115 volts or 110 volts. You just need the amperage and the correct wiring to it. And, the cords are generally long enough to attach from a wall to there. You might have some money involved in that. If it's a new vehicle, I know that some of the manufacturers will actually come to your house and put that in.
Yeah, manufacturers are starting to offer more at-home charging solutions, like Ford with their Pro Power for the F-150 Lightning, the EV truck. They have an option that you can buy a wall box, and typically at home, they're going to be what's called level 2 or running off a 240. And so you ideally, like the ideal situation for charging at home would be a dedicated circuit, nothing else on that circuit that is maybe a 40 amp circuit.
Oh, right. Yep.
240. And even though your average electrician or even some people are capable of installing something like that, it's really important to remember that when you're charging an electric car, you're running at the peak of what that circuit can handle, often for 6, 7, 8, 10 hours overnight, depending on the size of your battery and how depleted
Right.
it was and what state of charge you need to wake up to. But it's constant current. No other appliance in your house runs like that. Your electric range, yeah, that might be on a 40 amp circuit, but you're not running that for hours at a time. Your dryer, it's a 30 amp circuit, but you're not running that, for what, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And then typically you're done. It's not constant. So it's possible to even charge on 110. Really slow charge, maybe, 8 to 12 amps. Most 110 circuits are 15 amps.
Yep.
But they're not designed for that constant flow of electricity. So what can happen, and what I try to encourage people to be very hesitant when it comes to deciding how they want to charge their EV at home, is make sure that the wiring is very tight. Inside the plug, you want to make sure things are the wires are torqued properly to the outlet. Definitely want to make sure it's on a dedicated circuit, even if it's 110.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Reason being, if you're running, 12 amps for your EV and then you turn on, the microwave or something, like, you don't want to run into situations where you're overloading the circuit.
Yeah. You don't want to plug it in and then all the lights go out in the living room.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated.
No, and it's really not. And that's where I was saying, an electrician will be able to install the correct wiring, see if your house is available for an extra 40 amp double breaker, dual pole double breaker that would run the 230 amp or 230 volts or whatever. I'm sorry, 230 out to your house, your garage to get it to charge up. But that's interesting that you say that it does run that at for a certain length of time. And, I was going to make the reference. Yeah. If you have an electric stove, that's a similar amount of voltage that has to go to that. If you have an electric dryer, those are 230 volts. Or if you're, my compressor in my barn runs off of 230 and I've got it on a 40 amp circuit. So if something else, and it's on its own plug, so its own dedicated plug, so that nothing else will go out. If I'm using a battery charger or whatever else in my shop, nothing else is going to go out. So, man, and there
are certainly alternative options too. I myself am a great example of this. The house I've been living in for the last 7 years, I rent. I didn't have a separate circuit installed. I'm running a 75-foot welder's extension cable, so it's thick. I mean, it's rated at 600 volts and 50 amps. So I'm, it's plenty capable. But I'm running this essentially an extension cord from my dryer plug out the back window around the side of the house to where I have the wall box mounted on the outside of the house, because I don't have a garage either. So you could get creative and do things. The challenge with that is, of course, I am unplugging the dryer and plugging in the car charger, the extension cord, every day, unplugging one, plugging another back in. That is not ideal because, of course, I'm wearing down the contacts inside my dryer outlet.
Right.
So eventually, I have a situation where I know eventually if I don't change what I'm doing, resistance will build up because the contact won't be tight. Heat will build up and it'll probably melt or start a fire. So they actually make devices that are called smart splitters, where you can plug this into the outlet, plug in your EV charger on one side, your dryer on the other side, and it will automatically switch between the appliances based on what is asking for electricity. So your car will charge, but when you are running the dryer, it'll automatically turn off the car charger part, let you use the dryer. When the dryer is done, it will automatically switch back.
Right. Now, I was just going to suggest that too. I was like, Well, man, I would hook that
Yeah.
up to some sort of switch pod so that
so I mean, there are definitely products out there to make it easy so that, let's say somebody doesn't want to add a dedicated circuit. Well, yeah, you could probably use your electric range circuit, or your dryer circuit, and just put a smart splitter in there and use that, and that would work. Regardless of what people choose to do for charging at home, the most important thing is to make sure that it's safe.
yeah,
The last thing that anybody wants is to have something melt or a fire start because they just didn't take the time to properly plan for what they wanted to do.
yeah, and there's obviously local laws and local ordinances for stuff like that.
Well, yes, all of that too.
So, again, I would encourage them to talk to, the electrician that is down the road. You drive by them all the time. There's a company in town that, in our town in Jackson that says, we know how to put these in. They advertise it. So they're out there, folks, and they can certainly help you in that situation. So Zach, it was been really nice talking to you, man. This is a lot of great information. Tell us a little bit about your show and what you provide on a weekly basis.
Sure. So the EV Resource Podcast, which is on all the major podcast platforms, all the best ones, including audio only on YouTube. With the podcast, focus on the latest EV news and information, and occasionally I'll do interviews with industry experts. These might be CEOs of companies that are offering some sort of product or service to the EV community. But generally, I like to just keep people up to date on the latest happenings in the EV. So new vehicles, range tests, things like that. With the webpage, which is I hesitate to mention it because it definitely needs to be revamped. I built it myself and I am not a web designer. So if anybody goes to the webpage, ev-resource.com, please just forgive me for the.
Actually, I thought it was kind of. I thought it was
my ability.
I thought it was okay. I mean,
it's okay. It's not great, but my main purpose with the webpage is to create a place where people can find answers to the questions that they might not know they have. So I've got a whole EV 101 section that goes through different articles of, what to look for when buying a used EV. How does EV charging work? How does an EV work? The technology under the skin. What are all the components and how do they work together? And then the magazine is a monthly digital magazine, and I put that out basically to give people a little different idea. I tend to get a little bit more technical sometimes, but I do vehicle reviews, performance reviews. This month for the November issue, I've actually got the full performance review of the Genesis GV60. But I'm also talking about subscriptions for vehicle features. I get into just some of the topics that might not always come up in the other areas. But that's primarily it. Between the podcast, the magazine, the webpage, YouTube. And I did start this coming year will be the third year of throwing a big event as well. But that tends to be a little bit more specialized.
Okay. And you're available on all social media platforms. And he also has a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/EV Resource. If you want to be a supporter of his show, we encourage you to go there and support him in that respect. There are several different levels he's got on his Patreon page. So again, Zach, man, it was really nice talking to you, man. I've learned so much in the last hour that I'm going to go, I'm going to go test drive one of these. I really think I'm looking to do something as far as an EV. Cause my 2015 Silverado with a 6.2 gas engine that takes premium, I just spent $105 putting gas in it.
Ouch.
just before this podcast, actually.
Yeah, so $105 in either of my EVs will last about a month. and that's like thousands of miles. So,
Yeah, and it's encouraging.
Yeah, we didn't even get into all the costs.
And it's definitely encouraging. You know, listening to your story. We drove from Virginia to Miami in an EV, and we stopped to go to the bathroom, plugged it in. You know, you got to make sure you know where those spots are to charge. But man, that's really encouraging. I was like, man, could I go to Cleveland from mid Michigan? You know, it's 330 miles. It takes 4 hours to get there. You know, I stop at when they got rest stops on the Ohio Turnpike. They got charging stations. Mm-hmm. So that would be good. So,
yeah, they're out there, and we're getting more of them as well. So it's only going to get easier is kind of the message there. And anybody that is curious about electric vehicles, I would encourage them to do exactly what you just said. Go out there, test drive one, get your butt in the seat, feel how it drives. You know, ultimately that is the best way to get an impression about an electric vehicle, is to experience one.
Yeah. And I got to say that, you know, as a traditionalist, I don't know, you know, I'm thinking about this, and it was just like, man, this would be a great show. And I really appreciate having you on the show. And this is really enlightening to me, and hopefully is for everybody else. And again, thank you, Zack, for being on the show today. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the All Automotive Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Clausen. And again, big thanks to Zack Hurst from the EV Resource Podcast for being on the show today. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. If you like that conversation and you like to listen to more of my episodes, please like and subscribe to the All Automotive Podcast. We're available on all major podcast platforms. Until next episode, I'm Matt Clausen saying, keep the greasy side down.